On a rainy street, a quiet little girl searched for hope with trembling hands. One glance from a lonely, wealthy man changed everything. What he discovered about her past and his own would force him to choose between walking away or becoming the father she never stopped waiting for. Rain fell softly over Briarhaven, North Carolina, turning streetlights into blurred halos and washing the town in a quiet gray glow. The air smelled of wet pine and warm asphalt, the kind of rain that didn't shout, only lingered. On a street corner near the Civic Building, Mila Hart, 7 years old, stood beneath a flickering traffic light. She wore a faded pink hoodie, clean but worn thin at the elbows, and held a small, reusable tote, printed with the words, Briarhaven Clean Streets Program. Inside it, bottles clinked gently each time she moved. Mila wasn't rushing. She wasn't panicking. She moved carefully, checking the designated recycling bins along the sidewalk, lifting bottles one by one, wiping rain from the labels with her sleeve, before placing them neatly into her bag. Every motion carried intention, like this task mattered more than the cold soaking into her shoes. She whispered to herself, barely louder than the rain, "If I bring enough today, Mama won't worry tonight." Across the street, glass doors opened and Graham Locke, 38, stepped out of the council chambers. His navy coat was tailored perfectly. His posture controlled, his face calm, in the way only very successful men learn to master. But his eyes were tired. As he opened his umbrella, something caught his attention. A small figure, pink against gray. Stillness in a moving world. Graham paused. He had seen hardship before in reports and numbers in charity summaries, but this was different. This was quiet, dignified. A child doing her best without asking to be seen. Mila placed another bottle into her tote, hugged the bag close to her chest, and for a moment, closed her eyes like she was making a promise. The rain continued to fall, and without knowing why, Graham felt as though something in his carefully built life had just shifted. Only minutes earlier, Graham had been seated at the far end of a long conference table inside the council chamber. Polished wood, stale coffee, the low hum of officials discussing zoning permits and sustainability grants. Numbers filled the projection screen. Growth charts, forecasts, returns. Graham answered every question flawlessly. Yes, that aligns with our long-term projections. No, the environmental impact remains within compliance. Yes, we'll review the proposal. His voice was steady, professional, empty. His gaze drifted again and again to the tall windows where rain traced uneven lines down the glass. Another meeting, another decision. Another day where nothing truly touched him. When the chairwoman thanked everyone and adjourned the session, Graham stood immediately. His driver, Hollis, waited by the door with a larger umbrella already open. "Back to Lock Ridge?" Sir Hollis asked. Graham hesitated. The word back echoed strangely. "No," he said after a beat. "I'll walk." Hollis nodded, accustomed to Graham's silences. Outside, downtown Briarhaven glistened. Bakery lights glowed warmly. A thrift store window displayed mismatched toys. The town felt alive in small, ordinary ways Graham had forgotten how to notice. Then he saw her, the girl in the pink hoodie. She stood alone, but not lost focused, but not afraid, moving with the calm determination of someone who knew exactly why she was there. Graham slowed his steps. He told himself it was none of his business, that children had families, that systems existed for a reason. Yet something about the way she held herself, small shoulders squared against the rain, refused to let him walk past. A cyclist sped through a puddle nearby, water splashing wide across the curb. The girl stepped back too late. Her tote slipped from her hand. Time seemed to tighten, and before Graham could reconsider, his feet moved. The cyclist swerved at the last second, water spraying harmlessly across the pavement. The tote hit the ground with a soft clatter, bottles rolling just inches from the curb. Graham reached her instinctively, not roughly, not suddenly. His hand closed gently around Mila's wrist, steadying her before she lost her balance. Her glove was damp and cold beneath his fingers, impossibly small. For one suspended heartbeat, everything went quiet. Mila froze, then slowly looked up at him. Her face was pale from the rain, her lashes wet, but her eyes, hazel-flecked with gold, were calm, not frightened, just alert, measuring. "I'm sorry," Graham said softly, surprised by the strain in his own voice. "That was close." Mila nodded once. She eased her wrist free, polite and careful, then crouched to gather the bottles. Graham moved to help, stopping when she shook her head. "I've got it," she said gently. When she stood again, she hugged the tote to her chest like it held something precious. "I need to help my mama get better," she added almost as an explanation. Not a plea. The words struck deeper than Graham expected. He wanted to ask more, wanted to say, "You don't have to do this alone." But he knew better than to overwhelm a child with adult concern. Instead, he asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated just a moment. "Mila." The name settled into him like a memory he couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she said, nodding politely, already turning back toward the bins. Graham stood there, rain dripping from the edge of his umbrella, watching a 7-year-old walk back to her task with quiet resolve. As she glanced back once, only once he caught it. Those eyes, the same eyes he had seen years ago in another life. And suddenly, walking away felt impossible. Graham didn't leave the corner right away. He told himself it was because the rain was heavier now that waiting made sense. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. He was afraid that if he turned away, whatever had just cracked open inside him would close again. Mila continued her quiet work, moving from bin to bin along the block. She never crossed the street recklessly, never stepped into traffic without waiting. Each action was careful, deliberate, as if she'd memorized the rules of the world and followed them exactly. Graham watched from a respectful distance. She bent to lift a bottle, wiped it clean, then paused to let a couple pass before stepping back to the sidewalk. When a passerby dropped a receipt, Mila picked it up and placed it in the trash instead of letting it blow away. Small things, but they stayed with him. And then she looked back again, just a glance, quick, curious, not afraid. This time Graham saw it clearly. Those eyes were not just familiar. They were unmistakable. Sienna's eyes. The realization hit him with a physical force, like the air had been knocked from his lungs. He gripped the handle of his umbrella knuckles, whitening memories rushing forward without permission. Sienna laughing barefoot on his porch. Sienna squinting into sunlight, teasing him for being too serious. Sienna telling him once quietly, "Some things matter more than timing, Graham." His breath came shallow. That was impossible. Years had passed. Lives had diverged. And yet, here stood a child who carried that same unmistakable gaze. Mila finished her last bin and adjusted the strap of her tote. It was heavier now, but she didn't complain. She simply squared her shoulders and started walking toward the pharmacy at the end of the block. Graham hesitated. Following a child felt wrong, so he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he crossed the street, keeping his distance matching her pace without closing the space between them. He told himself he was just heading in the same direction. Nothing more. The neon glow of the pharmacy reflected off wet pavement as Mila pushed the door open and disappeared inside. Graham stopped under the awning across the street. Rain dripped from the edge of his umbrella. His heart pounded like he'd run a mile. If he walked away now, life would return to its careful, controlled silence. But if he stayed, something irreversible waited on the other side of that glass door. The pharmacy was warm and bright, smelling faintly of soap and citrus cleaner. The bell over the door chimed softly as Mila stepped inside, shaking rain from her sleeves. She approached the counter with practiced calm. The clerk recognized her immediately and smiled, not indulgently, not with pity, but with familiarity. "Hey, Mila," he said, You did the clean streets run today? Yes, sir, she replied. She set her tote gently on the counter and began removing the bottles one by one. The clerk weighed them, tapping numbers into the register. Mila watched closely, counting silently under her breath. When the total appeared, the clerk slid a small stack of coins and a voucher toward her. Mila gathered them carefully, lining the coins into neat rows before tucking them into her pocket. She checked the receipt twice, making sure nothing was wrong. May I get the fever tablets and the soup packets? She asked politely. The clerk nodded. Of course. Outside, Graham stood frozen, watching through the glass. There was no desperation here. No begging, no spectacle. Just a child navigating the world as carefully as she knew how. When Mila turned around with the small paper bag in her hands, their eyes met through the window. For a moment, neither moved. Time stretched thin. Mila didn't look startled. She didn't hurry. She simply held his gaze steady, composed, and gave a small nod. Not gratitude, recognition. Then she pushed the door open and stepped back into the rain. Graham exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He followed slowly, deliberately, staying far enough back to give her space. Mila didn't run. She didn't look over her shoulder again. She walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The neighborhood shifted as they moved newer buildings, giving way to older ones, brick-worn smooth by time, porches, sagging slightly, but still cared for. Mila turned down a side street and stopped in front of an apartment building with crooked mailboxes and a flickering porch light. She climbed the steps, paused, then glanced back. This time her eyes asked a question. Graham stepped into the light. I just wanted to make sure you got home okay, he said quietly. Mila studied him for a long second. Then she nodded. Okay, she said simply, and disappeared inside. Graham stood in the entryway long after the door closed behind her. The building wasn't frightening. It wasn't chaotic. It was simply tired paint peeling at the corners, a radio murmuring somewhere upstairs, the smell of detergent lingering in the air. Life lived close together. Graham glanced at the mailbox labeled Heart 3C. His chest tightened. He stepped back outside into the drizzle, heart racing, and forced himself to leave. Following further would cross a line. He knew that. The drive back to Lock Ridge passed in a blur of headlights and wet pavement. Hollis didn't ask questions. He never did. Inside the house, the silence greeted Graham like an old companion. Maris offered him tea. He declined. His thoughts were too loud. In his office, Graham loosened his tie and sat heavily at his desk. Papers weighted, contracts worth millions, emails marked urgent. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his laptop and pulled up the city's public street camera feeds. It took only minutes to find the right corner, the right angle. He rewound. There she was. Pink hoodie, small frame, careful movements. Graham zoomed in until the image pixelated, then sharpened again. Those eyes, no doubt, remained. His hands trembled as he printed the still image. The machine whirred too loudly in the vast room. Graham leaned back in his chair, staring at the paper. Sienna hadn't disappeared. She had survived, and she had a daughter. A daughter who carried herself with quiet courage, who asked for nothing, who trusted the world just enough to keep going. Graham pressed his fingers to his eyes. For years he had believed loneliness was the cost of success. Now he understood the truth. Loneliness was the cost of absence. And standing there alone in his glass-walled office, Graham knew one thing with absolute clarity. Walking away this time would not be an option. Morning arrived without brightness. Briarhaven woke beneath a low gray sky, rain still clinging to the edges of the streets, like it wasn't ready to let go. Inside Lock Ridge, Graham paced the length of his living room, coffee untouched on the counter. He tried to focus on work. He truly did. Emails stacked up. Calls from investors blinked unanswered on his phone. A deal in Chicago required his signature by noon. Any other day he would have handled all of it before sunrise. But today his mind kept circling one thing. Door 3C. He remembered Mila's careful nod. The way she didn't ask him to follow, but didn't push him away either. The quiet trust in her eyes had unsettled him more than fear ever could. By mid-morning, Graham stopped pacing. He made a choice, not impulsive, not emotional, but deliberate. He called Dr. Rowan Pierce, a physician known for discretion and home visits. "I'm concerned about someone," Graham said carefully, "an adult and her child. I'd like to offer help, but only with consent." Dr. Pierce didn't pry. "If they agree, I'll come." Next, Graham called Avery Sloan, his attorney. "I may have a personal situation involving a child," Graham explained. "I want everything done properly. No pressure, no assumptions." Avery's reply was calm. "Then you're already starting the right way." With those calls made, Graham put on a simple coat, no suit, no status, and asked Hollis to drive him back downtown. The apartment building looked smaller in daylight, less shadowed, more fragile. Graham stood outside for a long moment, steadying his breath. He wasn't here to rescue anyone. He wasn't here to control anything. He was here to listen. He knocked once, softly. Footsteps approached. The door opened partway. A woman stood there, thin, pale, but unmistakably Sienna Hart, 33. Her eyes widened. "Graham," she whispered. Behind her, Mila peeked around the doorframe, clutching her pink hoodie pocket. Sienna's shoulders tensed. "What are you doing here?" Graham met her gaze, steady and open. "I saw Mila yesterday. I was worried. I wanted to ask, are you okay?" Silence stretched. Then Mila spoke calm and gentle. "Mama, he helped me." Sienna closed her eyes briefly, and then slowly she opened the door wider. Apartment 3C was small but orderly. A single window let in soft gray light. A couch doubled as a bed. A kettle rested on a hot plate near the sink. Everything had its place, not because there was much, but because care lived here. Mila set the pharmacy bag on the table and immediately began unpacking it, lining the items neatly beside a folded cloth. Sienna leaned lightly against the wall, trying not to show how tired she was. Graham stayed near the door. "I don't want to intrude," he said quietly. "I just wanted to check in." Sienna folded her arms, not defensively, but protectively. "We're managing." Mila glanced at her mother, then back at Graham. "Mama gets tired sometimes," she said, "but she's strong." Sienna's lips curved into a faint smile. Then she coughed. It wasn't dramatic. Just enough to make the room pause. Mila moved to her instantly, placing a small hand on her arm. "Sit, Mama." Sienna obeyed. Graham's chest tightened. He forced himself not to step in uninvited. "I spoke to a doctor," he said carefully. "Only if you'd allow it. Just a visit. No obligations." Sienna studied him, really studied him for a long moment. "You always did things carefully," she said softly. "Even when you didn't know how to stay." The words weren't cruel. They were tired. "I didn't come to reopen old wounds," Graham replied. "I came because I saw Mila carrying worries no child should carry alone." Mila looked down at her hands. Sienna inhaled slowly, pride and exhaustion wrestling inside her. Finally, she nodded once. One visit. Relief passed through Graham, not triumph, not victory, just gratitude. Dr. Pierce arrived that afternoon, calm and kind. She spoke to Sienna with respect, asked questions without judgment, and examined her gently. Mila sat nearby, drawing flowers on a scrap of paper Dr. Pierce had brought. After a quiet moment, Dr. Pierce said, "This looks serious but treatable, with proper rest and medication." Sienna's eyes shimmered. "I didn't want Mila to worry." Dr. Pierce smiled softly. "She worries because she loves you. Let us help." Graham watched Mila reach for her mother's hand. And in that small, quiet apartment, something long broken began to shift. Evening settled gently over Briarhaven. Dr. Pierce had left instructions and a follow-up plan. Sienna sat on the couch wrapped in a light blanket Mila pressed close at her side. Graham stood by the window, rain tapping softly against the glass. "I want to make an offer," he said finally. "And you can say no." Sienna lifted her eyes. "I have a guest cottage at Lock Ridge," Graham continued. "Private, warm, temporary. Somewhere you can rest properly while Dr. Pierce monitors your recovery." Sienna's jaw tightened. "I don't want charity." Graham nodded. "Then don't think of it as that. Think of it as time, space to heal." Mila looked up, eyes wide but hopeful. She didn't speak. Sienna glanced down at her daughter, seeing the dark circles beneath her eyes, the way she tried to be older than 7. After a long silence, Sienna whispered, "Just until I'm better." "Yes," Graham said immediately. "Only until you're better. And everything is done openly and legally." Mila reached for her mother's hand. "Mama, please." That single word broke through what pride remained. Sienna exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Okay." Graham didn't smile. He simply nodded, honoring the weight of her decision. That night, Hollis helped them pack only essentials. No rush, no spectacle. As they stepped into the rain, Mila looked back at apartment 3C, not with sadness but with relief. The car pulled away, headlights cutting through mist, carrying them toward a place that didn't promise perfection. Only safety. And for the first time in a long while, Graham felt certain of something. This wasn't a rescue. It was a beginning. The guest cottage at Lock Ridge sat slightly apart from the main house, tucked among tall pines. Its windows glowed softly as dusk settled, casting warm squares of light onto the damp ground. Sienna hesitated at the threshold. For years, she had learned not to trust things that felt too easy. Mila stepped inside, first small shoes, pausing on the welcome mat. She looked around slowly, white curtains, a clean sofa, a kitchen table already set with soup and bread. "It smells nice," she whispered. Maris stood nearby, giving them space. "There's no rush," she said kindly. "Everything here is yours to use." Graham remained back, hands in his coat pockets, careful not to crowd them. Mila wandered toward the bedroom, her fingers trailing lightly over the bedspread, as if testing whether it was real. On the pillow lay a folded pink hoodie, brand new, but the same familiar shade. She picked it up, surprised. "Mama, it's pink." Sienna's chest tightened. She looked at Graham. "I didn't want her to feel replaced," he said quietly. "Just warmer." Mila hugged the hoodie once, then set it neatly beside her backpack. That night, Dr. Pierce checked in by phone, adjusting medication and reminding Sienna to rest. Mila ate soup at the table, swinging her legs, telling Maris about her favorite library book. Later, as rain tapped gently on the roof, Graham paused outside the cottage window. Inside, Sienna sat propped against pillows, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Mila curled beside her, drawing in a sketch pad Graham had left earlier. Mama, Mila murmured sleepily. "Do you think you'll smile again?" Sienna brushed her hair back. "I already am," she whispered. Graham turned away before emotion betrayed him. For the first time in years, the estate didn't feel empty. It felt occupied by hope. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in small, ordinary moments. Mornings at Lock Ridge began with quiet sunlight and birdsong. Mila helped Maris stir pancake batter, supervised laughing when flour dusted her nose. It wasn't work. It was play. Belonging. Graham found himself lingering in the kitchen longer than usual, sipping coffee while Mila explained very seriously the rules of board games she invented on the spot. Sienna rested following Dr. Pierce's instructions. Each day she seemed a little steadier, a little brighter. One afternoon, Graham knelt in the garden, sleeves rolled up, trying to plant tomatoes. "You're doing it wrong," Mila announced gently. He looked up. I am, she nodded solemn. You have to loosen the dirt first. Plants need room to breathe. He smiled and followed her instructions, soil streaking his hands. Later, he stared at those muddy hands in the sink, realizing how long it had been since he'd touched something real. That evening, Mila handed him a folded piece of paper. I made you something. It was a drawing, a house, a big tree, and 3 figures standing together. One tall, one small, one with long hair. Above them in careful letters, U.S. Graham's throat tightened. It's very good, he said. Mila tilted her head. Do you live alone? I used to, he admitted. She nodded like that answered something important. I don't like being alone. Neither do I, he replied. Across the room, Sienna watched quietly, something unreadable in her eyes. That night, Graham sat at his desk with old photographs spread out before him. Memories of Sienna from years ago. The resemblance was no longer something he could ignore. He called Avery Sloane. If a child might be mine, he said carefully. What's the right way forward? Avery answered calmly. With patience, with consent, and always with the child's best interest first. Graham closed his eyes. For the first time, he was ready to ask the question he'd avoided all his life. The truth didn't come in a dramatic confession. It arrived quietly like everything else that mattered. One rainy afternoon, Sienna sat at the cottage table wrapped in a sweater watching Mila color. Graham poured tea and joined her, careful to keep his tone gentle. Sienna, he said softly, there's something I need to ask, and you don't have to answer if you're not ready. She met his gaze. She already knew. Mila, Graham continued, has your eyes, your way of seeing the world. Sienna's fingers tightened around her mug. I should have told you, she said after a long pause. I was scared, angry, and I thought I could protect her on my own. Graham didn't interrupt. She's yours, Sienna whispered. She always has been. The words settled between them, not as an explosion, but as a weight finally set down. Graham's breath hitched. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want her to be a secret, Sienna replied. And I didn't know if you were ready to stay. Across the room, Mila looked up. She sensed the shift. Are you okay? She asked. Graham knelt beside her, bringing himself to her level. His voice was steady, but his eyes shone. Mila, would it be all right if I stayed with you, if I learned how to be someone you can count on? Mila studied him, those hazel eyes deep and thoughtful. Like a dad, she asked quietly. Graham swallowed. Yes, like that, but only if you want. Mila glanced at her mother, then back at Graham. She nodded once. Okay. Sienna covered her mouth, tears slipping free, not of fear, but relief. In that moment, the past loosened its grip, and the future, fragile, hopeful, real, finally began. The days that followed didn't feel dramatic. They felt careful. Graham insisted on it. Nothing would be rushed. Nothing would be assumed. Every step would be done openly with consent, with Mila's well-being placed firmly at the center where it belonged. He met with Avery Sloane at Lock Ridge, not in his office, but at the long kitchen table where Mila liked to color. The papers were kept out of her sight. The conversation stayed calm and respectful. This isn't about ownership, Graham said quietly. It's about responsibility. Avery nodded. Then we proceed with counseling options, medical permissions, and school stability first. Paternity testing only if and when everyone agrees. Sienna listened, hands folded, eyes steady. I want Mila protected, she said. From pressure, from expectations, agreed, Graham replied. She gets to be 7. Mila spent that afternoon in the garden with Maris, learning how to plant seeds in labeled rows. She knelt in the dirt, tongue peeking out in concentration, and announced solemnly that the tomatoes would need encouragement. They grow better when you talk to them, she explained. Graham crouched beside her. What should I say? She thought for a moment. Tell them they're safe. The words stayed with him. That evening, Sienna and Graham took a slow walk along the path near the cottage. The air smelled of wet leaves and pine. They kept a respectful distance, like two people relearning a language they once spoke fluently. "I didn't plan for this," Sienna said finally. "I didn't plan to need help." Graham nodded. "Neither did I. I planned to control everything." She gave a small, tired smile. "You were always good at that." "And terrible at staying," he admitted. They stopped beneath a lantern that cast a warm circle of light on the gravel path. For the first time, Graham said the words he'd practiced in his head all week. "I want to be present, not as a savior, not as a solution, as someone who shows up every day." Sienna studied his face, searching for cracks. She found only resolve. "That's all I ever wanted for her," she said softly. Inside the cottage, Mila sat at the table drawing. She held up her picture when they entered a bridge stretching over water with three figures crossing together. "What is it?" Graham asked. "A bridge," Mila replied. "So nobody falls in." Graham felt his chest tighten. Later, after Mila was asleep, Graham stood alone on the porch. His phone buzzed, an overseas partner, urgent. He let it ring. For once, the most important work was right here. The setback came quietly. It always did. Sienna was in the kitchen one morning helping Maris slice fruit. She looked better, stronger, but healing was not a straight line. Halfway through the bowl, she paused, pressing a hand to the counter. "I'm fine," she said quickly, noticing Graham's concern. "Just a little dizzy." Mila appeared, instantly placing a chair behind her mother. "Sit, Mama." Sienna smiled and obeyed. But by evening, the fatigue deepened. Her cough returned, not alarming, but persistent enough that Dr. Pierce was called. She arrived promptly, calm, but focused, checking vitals and listening carefully. "We should monitor this closely," Dr. Pierce said. "To be safe, I recommend a short hospital stay." Mila stiffened at the word hospital. Graham knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Doctors help people rest and heal," he said gently. "We'll be there the whole time." Mila nodded, gripping his sleeve. "Okay." The drive was quiet. Rain tapped the windshield in a steady rhythm. Graham sat beside Mila in the back seat, his arm a warm, steady presence. At the hospital, everything moved efficiently and respectfully. No panic, no raised voices. Sienna was settled into a room with soft lighting and kind nurses who spoke directly to her, explaining each step. Mila sat on the bed's edge, holding her mother's hand. "I'll be right here," she whispered. Graham waited just outside, hands clenched, replaying every moment he hadn't shown up years ago. Guilt pressed in, not sharp, but heavy. Hours passed. Mila grew sleepy, her head resting against Graham's chest. He wrapped his coat around her, carefully mindful of every breath she took. "We're not leaving," he whispered, not for anyone else to hear. "I promise." Just before dawn, Dr. Pierce stepped out with a small, reassuring smile. "She's stable. She needs rest, but she's responding well." Relief washed through Graham so suddenly he had to steady himself. Mila squeezed his hand. "Can I see Mama?" "Of course," Dr. Pierce said. Inside the room, Sienna looked pale but present. Her eyes found Graham's immediately. "She needs you," Sienna said softly when Mila stepped into the restroom with a nurse. "I should have told you sooner." Graham shook his head. "I'm here now." Sienna's eyes filled. "Promise me you won't disappear." Graham took her hand carefully. "Never again." The promise didn't feel dramatic. It felt necessary. Paperwork followed. Not as an obstacle, but as a path. Graham and Sienna met with Avery Sloan in a quiet office near the hospital. Counseling plans, temporary guardianship contingencies, medical consents, everything explained, everything documented. Mila was never treated like a case file. She was asked how she felt, what she liked, what made her feel safe. "I like knowing where people are," she said seriously. And when they come back, Avery smiled. Then we'll make sure you always know. When Sienna was discharged, they returned to Lock Ridge not as guests, but as people with a place. Mila ran ahead to the cottage, opening the door with confidence now. Home, she announced. Graham felt the words settle into him. Weeks passed. Sienna regained strength. She began baking again, slowly, carefully filling the cottage with the scent of cinnamon and apples. Mila helped by measuring ingredients, supervised and giggling when she spilled flour. One afternoon, Graham returned from a short meeting to find Mila waiting with a piece of folded paper. I made you something new. It was another drawing. This time, the three figures stood beneath a roof. No bridge, no water. Above them, written carefully, family. Graham knelt, holding the paper like it was fragile. Mila, he said softly, I don't want to be someone who promises big things and forgets. I want to be someone you can count on. She considered this, then smiled. Then you have to stay for dinner. He laughed, a real laugh. Deal. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Graham sat at his desk and realized something had changed. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of responsibility, of worry, of hope. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. The weeks after the hospital stay felt deceptively calm. Morning routines settled in: breakfast at the cottage, Mila's backpack. By the door, Dr. Pierce's scheduled check-ins written neatly on the calendar. Sienna grew stronger each day, but the weight of what still needed to be decided lingered like low clouds. Graham felt it most at night. He would sit at his desk, reviewing documents Avery had sent: guardianship clauses, emergency permissions, school enrollment options. None of it felt abstract anymore. Each page carried the gravity of a real child's life. One evening, Avery arrived at Lock Ridge in person. They sat at the kitchen table where Mila's crayons still lay scattered. There are questions we need to address, Avery said gently. Not problems, just realities. Sienna folded her hands. Ask. First, Avery continued Mila's understanding. She deserves clarity without pressure. Graham nodded. Agreed. They decided together to talk to Mila not with legal language but with honesty. That afternoon, Graham and Sienna sat with her on the porch steps. The sun filtered through the trees, painting soft patterns on the wood. Mila Graham began keeping his voice calm. Sometimes families are formed in different ways. Some by birth, some by choice. Mila listened closely, legs swinging. Sienna is your mom, he continued. That will never change. And I am someone who wants to be here for you every day if that feels right to you. Mila tilted her head. Forever, Graham smiled gently. Forever means showing up again and again. I can do that. She considered this, serious as ever. Will you still be here if I'm mad? Yes. If I make mistakes? Yes. If I don't feel brave? Graham's throat tightened, especially then. Mila nodded once, satisfied. Then she reached for both their hands and squeezed. Okay. That simple word felt heavier than any contract Graham had ever signed. Later that night, Graham stood outside staring up at the stars. The vastness that once made him feel small now felt grounding. For the first time, responsibility didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. The day of the legal hearing arrived quietly. No crowds, no tension-filled music. Just a modest courthouse in Briarhaven, sunlight slanting through tall windows. Avery had prepared everything meticulously. The goal wasn't to win, it was to formalize protection. Sienna wore a simple dress. Graham chose a neutral suit. Mila wore her favorite cardigan and held a small notebook ready to draw if she grew bored. Before they entered, Graham knelt beside her. You don't have to say anything unless you want to. Mila nodded. I know. Inside, the judge reviewed documents carefully, asking clear, respectful questions. There was no accusation in the room, only concern for a child's stability. Sienna spoke calmly about her health, her recovery and her wishes. "I want Mila safe," she said, and supported. Graham followed, his voice steady. "I'm prepared to be legally responsible, emotionally present, and patient. This is not about control. It's about care." The judge looked at Mila. "And how do you feel about all this?" Mila looked up from her drawing. She didn't smile for effect. She didn't dramatize. "I feel safe," she said simply. "And I know where people are." The judge nodded, satisfied. After a brief recess, the decision was clear: shared legal guardianship with provisions prioritizing Mila's well-being, education, and emotional health. Counseling options remained open, not mandatory, but available. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Sienna exhaled fully for the first time in months. Graham closed his eyes briefly, letting relief pass through him. Mila tugged on Graham's sleeve. "Does this mean we're going to dinner?" He laughed softly. "Yes, it does." They walked down the courthouse steps together, not as a spectacle, but as something more powerful, a family choosing each other in daylight without fear. Life didn't transform overnight. It deepened. Back at Lock Ridge, routines continued, but now with a sense of permanence. Mila's drawings stayed on the refrigerator. Her shoes joined Graham's by the door. Sienna began planning small things again. Recipes, a tiny garden patch, a future that extended beyond the next week. One evening, Mila sat at the kitchen table doing homework, while Graham reviewed emails nearby. She looked up suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Always," he replied. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "At school, they ask for emergency contacts. What do I write?" Graham set his laptop aside. "What feels right to you?" Mila thought for a long moment. "Can I write your name?" Emotion caught in his chest. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'd be honored." She smiled, satisfied, and went back to writing. Later that night, as Graham tucked Mila into bed, she clutched the edge of her blanket. "You know," she said softly, "I don't need you to be perfect." He smiled. "That's good, because I'm not." She yawned. "I just need you to come back." "I will," he promised. As he turned off the light, she added one last thing, almost too softly to hear. "Good night, Dad." The word landed gently, without ceremony. Graham paused in the doorway, steadying himself. "Good night, Mila." Outside, the estate rested beneath a calm sky. The silence that once echoed with loneliness now carried something new, belonging. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Healing always did. But tonight, the future felt possible. And for the first time, Graham knew that everything he had built, every wall, every success, had been leading him here. Home wasn't a place. It was a promise he intended to keep. Spring arrived quietly at Lock Ridge, not with fireworks, but with small signs that life was moving forward. The trees budded, the air warmed, windows stayed open longer in the afternoons. For Graham, the greatest change wasn't the season, it was rhythm. Mornings now began with the sound of footsteps racing down the hallway. Mila's backpack thumped against the wall as she hurried toward the kitchen, already talking about spelling quizzes and library books, before Graham had finished his first sip of coffee. He learned to listen differently, not like a man waiting to speak, but like someone who understood that attention was love in its purest form. Sienna's strength returned in stages. Some days were bright, others slower, but she no longer carried the fear of facing them alone. She began sketching plans at the kitchen table, nothing grand, just ideas that made her smile. A small cafe, a place with warmth, a place that felt like community. Graham encouraged her without pushing. "This is your dream," he told her one evening. "I'm just here to support it." Mila overheard and nodded approvingly, as if adult conversations required her silent endorsement. At school, Mila adjusted well. She wasn't the loudest child in class, but she was steady, kind to others, quick to notice when someone felt left out. Her teacher emailed Graham one afternoon. "Mila has a remarkable sense of empathy for her age." Graham reread the message twice. That night, Mila showed him a paper star she'd earned. It's for helping, she explained simply. For what? For noticing. Graham knelt to her level. That's a very important skill. One evening after dinner, Mila grew unusually quiet. She sat on the porch steps, hugging her knees, watching the sky darken. Graham joined her, keeping a careful distance. Do you ever think people leave when things get hard? She asked suddenly. He didn't answer quickly. Yes, he said finally. Some people do. She nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. I used to think it was because I wasn't good enough. Graham's chest tightened. He turned fully toward her. Mila, people leave because of their own fears, not because of you. She studied his face. Will you leave? He shook his head. No. And if I ever have to go somewhere, I'll tell you. And I'll come back. Mila exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that question for a long time. Okay, she whispered. And in that small exchange, something fragile grew stronger. The cafe opened on a soft summer morning. It wasn't large or polished. It was warm wooden tables, mismatched chairs, sunlight spilling through open windows. A chalkboard sign near the door read, Sienna's Table. Mila helped hang the final string of lights, supervised closely by Maris, while Graham carried in boxes of cups and napkins. The scent of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air. Sienna stood behind the counter, nervous but radiant. You don't have to do this today, Graham reminded her gently. She smiled. I want to. Neighbors trickled in, some curious, some familiar. Conversation hummed. Laughter followed. Mila sat on a stool near the counter, drawing pictures of cups with smiling faces. She waved at customers as they came in, proud and shy, all at once. Later that afternoon, when the rush eased, Graham found Mila standing near the back wall, staring at a drawing she'd taped there. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a roof with a heart over it. Underneath, she'd written home. He crouched beside her. That's a good word. She nodded. It means people stay. As the sun dipped lower, Sienna locked the cafe door and leaned against the counter, exhausted but happy. We did it, she said softly. Yes, Graham replied. You did. That evening they returned to Lock Ridge together. The house felt different now, less like a monument, more like a living thing. After dinner, Mila brought Graham a small velvet pouch. This is for you. Inside was a simple locket, not expensive but meaningful. When he opened it, he found a tiny photo of the 3 of them taken that morning in front of the cafe. Graham's throat tightened. Mila. She shrugged shyly. So you don't forget. He smiled, eyes bright. I won't. Later, as Mila prepared for bed, she paused at the doorway. Can I call you Dad? All the time, she asked. Graham met her gaze, steady and sure. You can call me that whenever you want. She smiled, small, satisfied, safe. That night, as Graham sat on the porch watching fireflies drift through the dark, he realized something simple and profound. He hadn't saved anyone. They had chosen each other. And that choice made every day was the strongest foundation he had ever known. Autumn arrived at Lock Ridge without asking permission. It crept in through open windows, carrying the scent of apples and fallen leaves, painting the hills in gold and quiet certainty. The estate, once pristine and echoing, now wore its life openly shoes by the door drawings on the fridge, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. It felt like a place that had learned how to breathe. On a Sunday afternoon, Sienna's table buzzed softly with familiar voices. The cafe had become a gathering point, neighbors stopping in for soup, parents lingering over coffee, children pressing their noses to the glass case of pastries. Laughter drifted out onto the porch, mingling with the wind. Behind the counter, Sienna moved with steady confidence, flour dusting her apron. Her health had returned in a way that felt earned, not rushed. Each day she stood a little taller, smiled a little longer. She greeted customers by name, now her warmth turning the cafe into more than a business. It was a refuge. At a small table near the window, Mila sat, coloring tongue tucked in concentration. She had drawn the cafe again and again, but today's picture was different. It showed a wide sky, a house, and three figures standing close, no question marks, no bridges. Just togetherness. Graham watched her from the doorway, a mug cooling in his hands. For years, he had built his life around control structures that didn't bend schedules, that didn't forgive. Now he found himself measuring time differently. Not by meetings or milestones, but by moments, Mila's laughter drifting down the hall, Sienna's quiet hum, while she baked the way the house settled into sleep each night, like it trusted the morning would come. Late afternoon light spilled across the cafe as Sienna locked the door and leaned back against the counter, exhaling. "We made it," she said softly. Graham smiled. "You did." Mila hopped off her stool and ran to Sienna, wrapping her arms around her waist. Sienna laughed, brushing flour from Mila's hair. The sound, easy, genuine, caught Graham off guard. He hadn't realized how deeply he'd missed it. They drove back to Lock Ridge together. Windows cracked open, leaves skittering across the road. The estate glowed warmly as dusk settled, lanterns already lit along the path. Inside, Maris had left a pot of soup warming and a note on the counter. "Welcome home. Home." After dinner, as the house quieted, Mila tugged at Graham's sleeve. "Can we sit outside?" They took the porch swing, the wood creaking gently as it rocked. Fireflies flickered in the garden like small, patient stars. Sienna watched from the doorway, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, content to let the moment unfold. Mila pressed a small object into Graham's palm. "I made something else." It was a folded paper, edges worn from being opened and closed too many times. Inside was a list written in careful letters, rules for being a family. "We tell the truth. We say where we're going. We come back. We help when someone's tired. We forgive." Graham stared at the list, chest tightening. "These are good rules," he said quietly. Mila nodded, satisfied. "They keep people safe." "Yes," he agreed. "They do." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the weight of her small trust settling into him like an anchor. For a long moment, neither spoke. The night held them gently. Mila, Graham said at last, voice steady, "I want to promise you something." She looked up, hazel eyes reflecting lantern light. "Okay? I can't promise I'll never make mistakes," he said. "But I can promise I'll listen. I'll learn. And I'll stay." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "That's enough." Inside, Sienna watched them through the window, emotion shining in her eyes, not fear, not regret, gratitude. When Graham looked up and met her gaze, she nodded once. Not approval, trust. Later that night, as Mila slept with her drawing tucked under her pillow, Graham wandered the quiet halls. He paused at the refrigerator, where magnets held paper stars, cafe menus, and Mila's drawings in uneven rows. He traced one with his finger, realizing how much had changed, without him noticing the exact moment it did. In his study, his phone buzzed, an old contact, an overseas partner, a reminder of the life he once believed defined him. He silenced it without hesitation. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whispered blessing. When Graham returned to the porch, Sienna joined him, slipping her hand into his. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. "Do you ever think about what we lost?" she asked gently. "Yes," he answered honestly. "But more about what we're choosing now." She squeezed his hand. "Me too." Autumn deepened, days shortened, evenings grew cozier. Mila started a tradition of leaving notes on the counter, on Graham's desk, on Sienna's pillow. "Thank you for staying. See you after school. Don't forget dinner." Each note felt like a quiet victory. On a crisp evening weeks later, the three of them stood in the garden, looking up at a sky sharp with stars. Mila pointed out constellations she'd learned in school, confident and animated. That one's ours, she declared, pointing to a cluster of lights. It's the family star. Graham laughed softly. I like that. As they went inside, Graham realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe before. The fear that had once ruled him of failing, of not being enough, had loosened its grip. Because love, he'd learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. And as Lock Ridge settled into night filled with ordinary sounds and extraordinary peace, Graham understood the truth that would guide him forward. Family wasn't a miracle that happened all at once. It was a promise kept quietly, kept daily, kept together. And their story, rooted in kindness, choice, and hope, was only just beginning. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.